So welcome to IATI's Datastore webinar. In the next hour, we're going to be focusing on using IATI's new Datastore. And we're going to be looking at a number of different things. So Petra, if we can move on to the next slide, please. So yeah, the areas we're going to be covering is what is the Datastore? You know, what is a technical product? What does it do? What can I expect to use it for and with? We're also going to be looking at some of the new features in the Datastore. As those of you who've been around IATI for a little while will probably know that this is the second iteration of the Datastore, which means it's bigger and better, and we're super excited to be using it. We're also going to spend a brief bit of time looking at who is already using the Datastore, as well as who do we kind of expect to be using it. So as an organization or as an individual, what can you expect to be getting out of the Datastore? We're then going to be moving into a workshop. And in this workshop, what I'm going to ask each of you to be doing is to open up the Datastore and then follow along with me. So we'll be talking through a number of the different features, and it would be fantastic if you could also be having a go on your own screens. We'll then take kind of a quick poll, it's all anonymous, just to see how well we've done at explaining the features and if we need to go back over any of them. And after that, we'll be moving on to a Q&A and a chance for you guys to ask questions and for a bit of discussion around the Datastore. And in terms of expectations, we're aware that those of you on the call or watching the webinar later on, you'll all have different experiences of using and interacting with IATI data. Some of you may be used to using dPortal or even the previous IATI Datastore. And this might mean you know the structure of IATI data and you know the codes incredibly well. And others of you may be brand new, and this is your first introduction to using IATI data. So in this webinar, we're presuming that you already know what IATI is. And at some level, you already know what IATI contains. Things like humanitarian and development financing, information about sectors, recipient countries, sustainable development goals, and the like. And if you don't know this, then I would advise that you take a look about the About section of our IATI website and then revisit this webinar at a later date. Those are some of the areas that we're not going to be covering today. We're also presuming that on an individual level, you know how to work tools like Excel, and that you can do some basic analysis and information retrieval. We're not expecting you to know how to do more complex data, pre-processing and post-processing, or analysis using tools like Tableau, Python, or R. We don't expect that level of knowledge from you. And with this in mind, we're going to look at what the Datastore contains, what some of its features are, and who it's for. And we're also going to look at some more of the recent use cases, and then to a practical run through of the Datastore's query builder, what it allows, as well as some of its limitations. We'll then briefly look at how we can manipulate the API call to help us get the data that meets our specific user needs. And in future, we'd like to run some more sessions on how to do more complex queries using the Datastore, involving using the Datastore's core API, and more of the data processing by users, as well as using the data inside tools and systems. And we'll talk more about this at the end of the webinar, and we look forward to hearing from you if you're interested in this. Petra, can we go back a slide, please? So yeah, what we'll cover in this webinar. We're going to look at what the Datastore contains, and as part of this, we're going to look at what's not in the Datastore, as that's also an important question when you're looking for certain data, so you know what to expect. We're going to spend quite a lot of time looking at how to access the data via the query builder. And a lot of the information we're going to be presenting to you is also in the query builder user guide, which will explain where that is. We'll also look at how to use the query builder's API. And just a note, this is recommended for ad hoc analysis. We don't recommend it for importing into tools and systems. Now, for those of you who haven't heard of an API before, It's basically a fancy word for a URL, like you have for an address for a website. And for the data store, what you do is you carefully form this URL or API, and this allows you to ask information from the data store itself and have it returned to you, much like going to IATIStandard.org and having the IATI Standard website returned to you on your computer screen. There is more information about this online, but otherwise feel free just to ignore the word API. What we won't be doing is we won't be analysing any of the query builder's output. That's outside the scope of this webinar. We're also not going to be looking into complex data queries. And as you can well imagine, IATI data is vast and it's also fairly complex. So for now, we're going to give you some tools about how to use the query builder, how to use the API, but they're all going to be rather simple. And we can go on to complex queries a bit later on. And often these more complex queries also mean there's more data processing that you will need to be doing as an individual. And so this is also out of scope. We're not going to be looking at specific use cases. We're going to keep the information in this webinar incredibly generic. And hopefully you can then begin to apply it to your own organizations or your own interests. And we're also going to touch on the main data store API. And this is different from what the query builder used to work. It's what we recommend for data use tools and systems. And it works slightly differently, and we're not going to be covering it in this particular webinar. Cool. If you've got any questions, please do put them in the chat box, and then we'll circle back around to them later. Petja, can we please move on to the next slide? So, what is the IATI Datastore? We thought it would be useful to start with a little bit of background, so a little bit about of context setting about what the data store is. So, as you may well know, this IATI Datastore is actually the second IATI Datastore. The original was released back in 2013, when the IATI Standard was at version 103. And version 103 contained far less data than in our current version, which is version 2.03 of the standard. And in this version 1, there was far less standardization. The data store allowed users to filter by some of the key elements and return most of the IATI activity data, but certainly not all of it. And over time, it was improved to also work with version 2. But it never contained all of the data, or at least it never allowed you to return all of it, nor did it allow users to query by all the different elements and attributes that are found in the activity standard. And you could do this neither in the API or the query builder. So for a long while, we've known that we needed a new one, built with more robust technology, and one that we can scale up. And this led to us consulting with the community about what a new IATI Datastore should contain and how it should be used. And this includes advanced features and ability to query by every element and attribute. Zimmerman were awarded this work, and they'd already been using their own system, OIPA, for years, and had a head start on building the functionality of IATI's new data store. So from 2019 through to 2020, the data store was being built and rigorously tested by both the IATI Secretariat and known IATI data users. We were keen to ensure that everyone using the old data store could transition onto the new data store with minimal disruption. This testing phase became public in August 2019 and has led to our full launch, which happened September 2020. And we have an ongoing process in consulting with data users and having them log the ideas and issues about usability and features on the data store's GitHub pages, and also in direct communication with us in the IATI Secretariat. And these include ideas on how to make the returned data more user-friendly. It includes things like USD currency conversion, the ability to query activity and transaction level information in one go. And some of these features, these requests have been implemented, and we're continuing to work on adding more of them. We're also conscious that we don't want to be transforming or processing data in the data store. So some of the suggested features are being logged for when we come to build a new data portal, which will be akin to dportal, but we're unsure what this looks like yet. On to the next slide, please, Petra. So what is the IATI Datastore? So the IATI Datastore provides access to data published by organizations according to the IATI Standard on their resources and results. It's an online tool, and it holds all valid IATI activity and organization files. It updates every 24 hours. And please note there are a few exceptions to this rule, and these normally involve critically invalid files. So the files that the Datastore contains are all of those which are published at version 2 of the IATI Standard, and those which don't fail schema validation in the Datastore. And invalid files are the ones which the validator marks as critically invalid. So that's the big purple error message if you have used the IATI validator. And this normally occurs because the structure of the file is incorrect. It also the Datastore also contains some metadata about publishers' files, as well as a number of the IATI code lists, where you can return the codes and their names. And it's important to note that the Datastore doesn't do any pre-processing of the data. It holds exactly what publishers have put in their files. In other words, it just stores the data. This means that the data you can get out of the Datastore is likely to need cleaning and processing. This might be turning all the financial values into your required currency, or maybe text into your required language. And we know that there are areas like special characters, which don't always get encoded properly if you download them in CSV. And in terms of transforming the data, you're also likely to need to be able to transform it yourself. For example, you might want to split activities budgets by the different sectors. And this processing work you'll need to be doing on the data. What the Datastore does allow, it allows us to query the data by all the elements and attributes in the IATI Standard. The totality of IATI data is too big for most users to download on their computers and would take rather a long time. So what we need to do is query the data, allowing us to return the data we're interested in. So we add a certain number of parameters which we want the data to meet. And we do this by building queries made up of filters, such as if I only want data that has to do with a particular sector, or maybe with a particular country. Or maybe I only want data to do with a particular country that also contains results information, or subnational locations. And this begins to limit the size of the data we're going to have returned to be far more manageable. And the Datastore offers two ways to access this IATI data. The first one is the core Datastore API. And for this, technical users can return IATI data from across all data fields, referred to as elements, of the IATI Standard by using the Datastore's Django API. This API interacts directly with the database and provides access to all activity and organization files, file metadata, and the code lists. For those of you who are more technical, this is a Python application wrapped around an SQL database. This is the recommended way for producers or tools to access the data. However, do note that this API is also a little slow, and some patience is needed for the data to be returned. So if that's for kind of our technical users, importing data into tools and systems, what is the other option? The other option is the Query Builder API, and it's a second API which has been built on top and acts a bit like a search engine. It allows for quick and flexible searching of IATI activity data. And note that it only uses can only return activity data. And it's also got some improved narrative searching. That is searching the titles and descriptions. The API is more liable to change, as we're able to add more features to it more quickly. And this makes it great for research projects and ad hoc analysis, but not for use within tools and systems. It doesn't actually interact with the database, but only pre-prepared data held in a cached layer. And please note that this query builder and its API can struggle downloading some large datasets. An extreme example is trying to download all published IATI activities. You are very unlikely to be able to do this with this API. If you are using it and get into trouble with downloading errors, then please do get in contact with us and we will be there to help. And on top of this API, we've built a user interface. That's the query builder. That allows users to build their activity API calls by selecting different features and filters. It's a less technical way to build API queries. Once you've selected your filters, you can see a summary of the data to be returned before downloading it. It also shows you the API you've created. And please note that this query builder contains a limited number of filters. You can't filter by every element and attribute when using the query builder. And we'll look at what options you have here in the workshop part of this webinar. Moving on to the next slide, please, Petra. So, new features. What are the new features of this data store? So from here on, we're going to be focusing on the functionality of the query builder and the API on which it's built. So using the query builder and the API, you can have the full amount of IATI data returned. So this is in an IATI activity file. You can return all of the published elements and attributes. And you can get this in XML, CSV, or JSON format. And you can query by almost all elements and attributes using the API, of which a set of the key elements and attributes can be found in the query builder. And we're in the process of adding more in as users request them, trying to balance out keeping the query builder streamlined and easy to use, as well as having the right elements and attributes for users that are going to be required and useful for users. There are also a set of conditional filters, such as greater than or less than. And this search works only on activity and budget dates, as well as financial values. And this allows users to search for activities which meet their criteria. We're also looking to add this in for transaction dates. In terms of outputs, there are 3 different outputs possible, and these are activity, transaction, and budget options. And this means you can see 1 activity per row, or 1 transaction per row, or 1 budget per row. And this depends on your use need, what you'll want to use. When downloading a CSV file, we also provide 3 options. These options are there, and we also provide the options to further break down the data within them, which we'll come into a little later. And please note that some elements, such as the reporting org, activity identifier, are shared between each of the outputs. And this allows you to combine the data in the way required for you. We're still investigating which elements are most helpful to include in each output, trying to find the balance between useful information and not duplicating data unnecessarily. We've also got a country and region explosion. So in a CSV file, that can be applied to CSV files. In IATI, activities can be attached to multiple recipient countries and sectors, and each of these should be published with a percentage if you're doing so at activity level. And as a data user, you can use the percentage to calculate the committed, dispersed, and different types of finances and different types of transactions going to each country or sector. However, this can be hard to separate out using tools such as Excel. The explosion option repeats an activity for the number of sectors or countries published in that activity. Currently, you can do this for sector or for country, but not both at the same time. This, along with the recipient region option, is a feature we'd like to add soon. You also have the option to choose which fields are returned to you. It may be that you don't need to see every single element in IATI. And so rather you get to select just the data that you want to be returned. And coming soon in the query builder is the USD conversion. This is already in the main Datastore API, but we're hoping in about 2 weeks' time, there will also be a USD conversion option for the query builder. We're also looking to add in enhanced searching for activity and transaction level data simultaneously. So this is where country, sector, or region information can be published either at activity or at transaction level. And we want to be able to search both in one query. This is partially implemented in the query builder already as of this week, but there's a bit more work we want to be doing on it. Move on to the next slide, please, Petra. So who's using it? The Datastore is still in its early days. And during testing and launch, we've been supporting various people and organizations to use the Datastore. And this includes various charities, as well as consultants working for particular charities and organizations, conducting country-based research. So one of those is Oxfam Philippines, who have been requesting various research projects with which they've used IATI data. We've also got the Clean Air Fund, analysing clean air funding that's published to IATI. And that data was taken from the IATI Datastore. Academic institutions and their students have also been working on particular papers. And we've helped them to, say, compare data from the previous FCDO departments, DFID and the FCO, comparing their transparency and spend. We've also got some of our donor governments beginning to import, present and mine IATI data. And as a secretariat, we've also been using the Datastore API to retrieve data that we've then processed and provided to partner country governments. So this is just a glimpse, and there will be many more organizations who are already using the IATI Datastore that we've not been in touch with yet or haven't, that aren't represented on the screen. If you have been using the IATI Datastore, we would love for you to get in touch with us to let us know how you found it, and also what some of the projects you've been working on and how you've been finding it. So that brings us to the end of the kind of the overview of what the Datastore is. We're now going to be moving into our workshop part for the last half an hour. And what I'm going to ask you all to do is to follow along with me. So we've got the address for the IATI Datastore. Petra will also put this in the chat box. And we'll give you a couple of moments to open up on your own computers. And I will then be sharing my screen. And we'll have a look at the Datastore firsthand. And I'll ask you to be doing the same. So we'll give you a few seconds to be able to open that one up. Okay, hopefully now you can all see my screen, which says IATI Datastore on it. Do post in the chat box if you're not able to. So this is the front page of the Datastore. And we can click into the query builder. And the query builder, as a quick recap, is a simpler way to build an API query. You do it by adding in filters, such as the filters include code names and keyword searches. The first thing to note about the query builder is where to find the query builder user guide. And if you've got any questions about how the query builder works, it can be a good place to start. So up at the top here, just under the heading, you can see a link to the query builder user guide, which will download as a PDF for you. You can then look through the different contents to find what you need, and hopefully there is an easy to read instructions about how the query builder works and what data you can filter by and what you can expect to find. So please do give that a look through after this webinar. So what we can see, there are 4 different tabs. The first of which is our core filters tab. And the core filters contains the primary way in which we filter data. And so these are things like reporting organization. So who is publishing the data? Or the sectors. Which sectors are being targeted by a particular activity, as well as the recipient country and the recipient region, and filtering by dates. And so if we give this a try, first of all, we get to choose a particular reporting organization. So say we choose UNDP. This will then filter the data for all of UNDP's projects. And if we jump to the results screen, we can see that a large number of projects are returned to us. We can also select a second organization. So maybe we choose the World Food Programme. And this works like an AND set. This works like an OR search. So now we're looking for all activities published by UNDP, or the activities published by the World Food Programme. And so and we see that this number of activities that is returned grows. However, if we choose, say, UNDP, and then we choose a particular sector, so maybe it's teacher training, what we'll see is that the number of activities drops. They obviously don't have any activities to do with teacher training. If we choose a country, so we choose the recipient country, Ghana, we can then see that it's returned 106 activities. So it's beginning to filter the data by both UNDP and by the country. So when you choose multiple filters, it works like an AND filter. So it's reporting org and recipient country and any others that you choose to add in. And one thing to note is that when you're searching by recipient country, sector, or by recipient region, it's searching at both the activity and the transaction level. So it doesn't matter which organization you're looking at and how they choose to structure their activities. You should always be returning the activities for those filters. Another key thing to mention is that at the top here, we have a narrative search. And so we can type in the term that we're interested in. And then in the results, we can see different activities that contain the word forests in either their activity titles, their descriptions, or their transaction descriptions. And this is also a way of searching for unique activities. So we can we can take an activity identifier and also search for it here. And we'll see that this one activity is returned for us. And please note that with the text search, that the capitalization of letters doesn't matter. They can be capitalized or not capitalized and perform the same search. The other key area is looking at filtering by date. And there are some options here, and it can get a little tricky. So ideally, we choose the yes option because we want to filter by date. We then have the option to filter by activity or by budget. So we can enter dates in here, say from which dates and to which dates. And the way we toggle between activity and budget searches is in the output format. So in the output format, here we get to choose whether we want to see each unique activity per row, each financial transaction per row, or each budget in defined periods. And so if we have chosen the activity output, then we'll be searching by activity dates. If we search by the budget output, we'll be searching by the budget dates. And in time, we're also looking to add in the transaction search there too. So the next tab is the additional filters tab. So on top of the core filters, these are filters that you may well want to use, but they are likely not to be used in every type of query. So here we can search for transaction provider org, receiver org, as well as participating organizations. And this can be a great way to work out how your organization is being referenced by other publishers and their activities. And under the add filter, we've also got a number of the different elements contained in the IATI standard. So, for example, we've got the humanitarian flag here. So if we choose the humanitarian flag, we then have the option to pick one of the two Boolean options that's available, 0 false or 1 true. And if we want to get rid of this, we click back in, and then we can uncheck humanitarian. And maybe we want the IATI version and the tag. And here underneath, we'll then have the option to choose the different versions, as well as kind of the SDGs that can be published within a tag element. So hopefully that will make sense for you so far. So then coming on to the output formats. As we said, we've got all the different outputs, the activity, transaction, and budgets. And if we just choose the unique activity, we'll be presented with all of the activity information. And then what we get to do is if we know the data we're looking for, we can begin to select it. So it may all be IATI identifier, reporting organization, title and descriptions. And then it's only this data that's going to be returned to us. And so please do have a look through and see what the different options are. If we want to look at each financial transaction, we can also see there are a limited range of elements and the types of data that we can return. And so this is all the data that is held at transaction level for an activity. If we're doing each budget, there are no options. Currently, you can the data store has pre-selected what it's going to be returning to you. The other key thing to note is the second line of repeated rows. So this is when there are multiple sectors or countries in an activity. So as an example, we're going to put in one of the World Bank's activities. And let's take off our filters. I wonder why this is it's no longer picking up. Let's try and refresh the page. There we go. So this is one activity published by the World Bank. If we go to the output format, we've got each unique activity. We can then download the CSV file. That one. And then what we'll see is that we have a CSV file and it's got one row. And we've got all of the activity information in this row. And if we go along to our sector element, so this is our sector vocabulary. And what we can see is that there are multiple different sector vocabularies. There are also multiple different sector codes. And this is because this particular organization has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sectors published within it. And this data can be hard to use when you're using Excel. So the other option we have is the multi-sector expansion. And this time, when we download the CSV file, we'll see something slightly different. Let me just pull this up. This time, we have the same activity, but the activity has been repeated for every sector that has been published. So if we now scoot along to the sector, what we can see is that the sector breakdown has been separated out between the different activities. All the other information is the same, but the sector vocabulary, sector code, and sector percentage has been broken down, which will hopefully make it easier for you guys to use. And the same can be done with recipient countries, but activities are less likely to have multiple recipient countries per activity. Sector is far more common. So hopefully that one made sense and you guys were following. So the last page is the results page. And what we see first of all is we get a summary of the data that's going to be returned. And this is useful just to make sure you know if you are expecting some data to be returned, you know that it's going to be pulled through. Sometimes it's possible that you've added in maybe slightly too many filters and there is no data available. So this will give you a heads up before you choose to download it. We've also down here, the default setting is that you download the first 50 activities. And this is to help prevent large downloads of data accidentally from the data store. You have also got the option to download all the activities that have been returned. We then have the option of downloading in XML, downloading in JSON, or downloading in CSV. So if we return here. And what we also see is, for those of you who are slightly more technical, the Query Builder API is presented to you on the left-hand side. And so we get to begin to see how this works. So say we choose, that's under sector. So if we choose a recipient country, and say we choose UNDP as an example, and we have a look at this API. We start off by what looks like quite a normal URL. And then scrolling along, we can see that reporting org reference is looking for a particular, we're looking for the UNDP reference. And we're looking for recipient country code, Ghana. And that's at activity level, or it's looking for the recipient country code, Ghana, at transaction level. And so we can begin to see that the query is formed exactly as we want it. There's also the option of being able to copy this, pasting it into your URL, and then beginning to manipulate it. So if you're comfortable working with APIs, this might be something you want to look into if you come across a limitation in what the Query Builder can offer you. And the API is built using Solr technology, and there's a lot of documentation around Solr online. So please do have a look at that. And if you're looking for the names of the elements or the attributes and how they're stored in the IATI Datastore, you can have a look at the API documentation. And so if we go into the activity list and we look at the request parameters, we can see down here that we've got the different names. They, on the whole, they match exactly what's in the IATI standard. It can be useful to reference. Now the documentation here is largely for the core Django API, but the naming conventions are exactly the same. There is a small amount of documentation about the Solr API under Data Explorer. It's not extensive, so we advise using the main Django documentation for the names, and then also having a look online for the opportunities that Solr provides. So that is a run through of the Query Builder. So hopefully you were following along. So what we now want to do is open up a poll for you guys, just to kind of check your understanding. We're going to ask you a few questions. All responses are anonymous, and we'll see how you get on. So let me just go find this. Petra, do you have the option to do the polls? I now don't have the option.
Right, I do have, and just to say thanks everyone as well for your questions in the chat. Hopefully we've answered some. There'll definitely be more time. So yeah, I can do, as Amy explained, I can do that now, Amy. And it's just some questions that we've added. As Amy said, they're anonymous, but it's just for you to give it a try in using the Query Builder. So I'll launch this now and let's see. Right. Can people see questions in the poll? Yeah. Yes, amazing. That's really good.
So Petra, you should be able to see the results
Yes,
and maybe share once
exactly.
we reckon enough people have had a look.
Exactly, yeah. So we'll give a few minutes. I think just have a go. Obviously, Amy will share as well. The answers of those is just for you to have an opportunity to give it a go and start completing the poll.
And Petra, are there any questions we can begin to chat through as people are working on the poll?
Yes, we can. So we've had some questions that we've answered directly in the chat. I think some specifically on the API, which Amy already started talking about. I think specifically searching on the activity and transactions separately, which I think you showed Amy in already in the kind of last presentation on the documentation. One of the questions I think we had from Catherine, which I think was quite good on the search. So there isn't a set of keyword searches that you enter. It's basically free text that you can add. Was one of the other questions that we've had. I had another message again about the API, and I think Amy will talk about this at the very end, that we're happy to set another session specifically for that, for more technical users on that. I think that's kind of what we mainly had. One of the questions, I think, specifically on the humanitarian filter, and again, because that is not a mandatory field, I think in the response, what I've explained is it would return all values, and then you can filter on that. I can see 2 people already have voted, which is great. So give it a few more minutes. If you have any questions in the meantime, do add to the chat, and then and then we can end the polling and see some of the results, and Amy can share.
Yeah, hey Elma, you've got a question about the transaction versus activity level searching in the query builder. So absolutely, this functionality was added to the query builder earlier this week. So when you begin to search, say by a country or by sector or a region, those activities will be returned to you. You'll be able to tell the difference, as those with activity level data, the activity level, sector, country, region columns will be populated. Those in the transaction level, so those columns will be, the transaction level columns will be populated with the data. In terms of how it can be done for the fully expanded for each transaction, is that in reference to kind of the sector and country explosion? This is an area that I will be testing this week, exactly how this looks and works. So that's currently pending testing on my side. We decided to put it out public as it's such a useful feature. But yeah, I will get back to you on exactly how that one works.
Great, thank you.
All right, I can see more people. We have 8 people already, so give it maybe a minute or 2, and then I'll share the slides as well. Yeah, if there are any other questions in the interim, let us know. Great. Okay, I think I'll give it another minute, and then we obviously will share the questions after the webinar. So for those of you who are not ready to do that, you can give it another go as well.
So another question is, can you confirm that the API query generated in the results section directly connects to the main Django API? So at the moment, it doesn't. The query that's provided using the query builder uses the Solar API. The Django API is separate, and that's what the documentation is for. But what the query builder uses is the Solar one.
Okay, I suggest we're nearly halfway, so I'll suggest I'll end the polling, and hopefully you can see the results. And I'll share, right. Share results, let's see if that works. Okay. Can people see on their screen?
No, can't see the results of the poll. You may need to share your screen, Petra.
Okay, let's see if this works. No, I'm not sure. No.
Oh, apparently everyone else can see the results, so it's just me. Therefore, it's fine.
Okay,
You chat through them.
great. Okay, that is really good. So do you want to, Amy, I'll share back the slides and maybe run through those questions briefly and go through the last points. I think that will be a good next step. Okay. Yeah. Right. There we go, Amy. Do you want to run through?
Cool. I can't see the results, so Petra, maybe you want to?
Okay, so on the first one, which we've had, how many activities has UNDP published? So the majority of people, we've had 80% who's answered 106, which is the correct answer. So well done, everyone, on this one. Then on the second one, on basically working with the filters and adding another country, or what happens if you add another sector, the right answer is A, increases, and B, decreases, which most people have answered right. So that's as well good. How many activities contain the word COVID-19? And that's a good question too. I think one of the other questions we had about the free text search, again, 3,530, which is correct. Where can you find the policy marker filter? So that's, again, add filter. Well done on everyone in using the interface and finding that at the right place. And then we had two questions that were, I definitely knew that they were trickier, but we wanted to add them just so we build your knowledge on this. So what does the multi-sector expansion option do? And the right answer, and again, the majority of people, repeating activities with one sector each row, which is great. And then the last two questions, which elements can you choose to include in your output? And on this one, it's basically all for activities, some for transactions, and none for budget. So maybe this is one where we can follow up additionally to explain a bit more to people on how this selection works. I think that's a good one because probably it's not the most intuitive for everyone. And then how many formats can you return data in? Again, on this one, we have CSV, JSON, and XML. And I think majority of people have selected those not yet having Excel. So well done, everyone. I think that's been quite good. Hope you enjoyed that. I'll hand over to you, Amy, because I know we have very few minutes left towards the end.
So that kind of brings us to the formal part of our webinar. And Petra, I wonder if you could move on to the next step slide for us. So yeah, this is certainly not the end of our journey with the data store. And we would really love to hear your data use needs. So both how you can imagine the data store might work for you in terms of using IATI data, as well as any success stories and any challenges that you have in using the data store as it stands. And then we will do our best to hopefully continue to train and work out ways in which we can support you to be using the IATI data store. And one of the things we want to do is we want to run future tailored training sessions. Today has been very generic and focusing kind of on the ad hoc use of the query builder. And so we know particularly going forwards, looking at some certain use cases or using the APIs in more detail could be useful. So if you would find that useful, please do let us know what you would like training on, and we will see where we can organise that. We'd also love you to start sharing your use cases, both so we can kind of promote and inspire others, as well as us, and together as the IATI community, we can help solve those issues. We're also looking to demonstrate data use on the new community platform. So if you've not seen this already, but we've got a new kind of platform launching on the 30th of November, being headed up by UNDP. And in that, we'll have communities of practice. And one of those areas will be looking at data use. As you use the data on the data store, if you do come across any issues or you've got ideas for features, please do let us know them. The best way to kind of log them is to go onto GitHub, and we put the link there and raise them as the issue. There's an option to add it as a bug or as a feature. So please don't be shy and do start using that channel. And as always, if you have any questions, then do get in touch with us at support@iatistandard.org. In the next week, we'll be following up with all of you on the call, asking you for a bit of feedback over this training session, how you found it, what we could do to improve, as well as with the recording of the webinar, as well as the presentation. So please do be looking out to your inboxes, and we'll be coming, that will be coming your way. I'm aware that we have reached our 4 o'clock deadline already, so it's been fantastic having you with us. We hope you enjoyed it, and for those of you in the webinar and for those of you watching online, thank you.